Open that book, turn that page, start learning stuff at any age. Read, read, read. Reading's what you need to be what you want to be, what you want to be.
Hi, I am Chris Evans, a professor of English at Orange Coast College. Go Pirates! And I am thrilled to invite you to the S.T.E.A.M Race to Space Reading Challenge. Just for reading some amazing books about science, math, coding, engineering, and the arts, you can win some incredible prizes. You can tour the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. You can visit the Discovery Cube. You can talk to astronauts, have real questions with them, and so much more. But most importantly, you'll learn how important math, science, technology is, and how it benefits us all. So join us in this Race to Space reading challenge. After today's event, you can visit the website to register for this incredible adventure. So let's blast off by talking to some amazing writers, artists, and scientists. So welcome, everyone.
Hey there.
Adam, how are you? Don, how are you?
Hi.
Thank you for having us.
Hey, everyone.
Thank you
Excited
for
to be here.
the S.T.E.A.M Race to Space Reading Challenge. I am so excited about this. Let's first begin with Sarafina. Okay, so Sarafina, let's talk for just a moment.
Sure.
I want to introduce first Sarafina Nance. She was chosen as one of Forbes' 30 most inspirational women, but she's also an astrophysicist, an analog astronaut, a science communicator, an author, and a women's health advocate. You might have seen her work on the BBC, NPR, National Geographic, and today she's here to talk about her wonderful book, Little Leonardo's Fascinating World of Astronomy. So Sarafina, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Oh, it's wonderful to have you here. Let's start with this before we discuss your book. You're an astrophysicist and an analog astronaut. That is so cool. Have you always loved space? Have you always loved science? How did you get interested?
Yeah, I have loved astronomy since I was a little kid. I used to stargaze with my dad all the time. I would listen to Stardate radio with my mom. And I was just enchanted from a very, very young age with the night sky. And I basically devoted myself to that starting at age 4, and it never went away.
Wow, you started at 4. You already knew.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
One track mind.
Well, today you're talking about the fascinating world of astronomy. And you, in this book, you explain the universe so beautifully. I wish I had this when I took college astronomy. I think it would have helped me probably.
Right. Thank you.
But let me ask my first question. In your book, you talk about how stars are alive. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So it's interesting because stars live, they're birthed, they live, and then they die, just like humans, just like things here on Earth. Basically, their formation, they're birthed in a stellar nursery with a bunch of other stars. And then once nuclear fusion ignites within their core, they start living. They go throughout their life cycle, they get bigger, then they get smaller, and then ultimately they stop fusing, which is when they die. And so stars, they're really interesting for a lot of reasons, which I talk about in the book. But one of them is that they are literally the places where life is formed in our universe. All of the elements that make up life here on Earth are formed in the cores of stars. And so there's this really interesting relationship between, they have their own life cycles, but they're also responsible for life as we know it.
Well, your book so beautifully describes that, but it also had a part I love, which was dark matter and dark energy. That sounds scary. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I remember when I first learned that we only know 4 to 5% of everything in the universe, and everything else is something we don't understand, and that things are dark energy and dark matter. So dark energy is the force that basically makes the universe expand and expand and expand. And then dark matter is this invisible matter that we can't see, but we know exists. And so talking about that was really cool because I remember learning about that as a teenager, and I was like, why didn't I know about this? We only know so little. And that's why I included it.
Well, like you, I love looking up at the night sky. I'm enchanted by it, even here when it's sometimes obscured by clouds. Um, but your book talks about how all of these other planets have more than one moon. We only have one moon that we can see, and there are so many more moons around so many other planets. Can you talk about those?
Yeah, so one of the really interesting parts of science that's kind of going on right now is looking for these exomoons. So they're moons on other worlds outside of our solar system. And so these moons can actually be like other habitable places in our universe. And so we can look to moons to actually find future planets for us to live on potentially, or even search for life outside of our solar system. So moons are just as exciting, I think, as planets.
Serafina, do they discover the moons like visually, or do they discover them with math? Like, how do they discover and find moons on other planets?
Yeah, it's done a lot of different ways. Sometimes it's visual, but you can imagine it's very, very small, right? Moons are tiny. And so you have to do some really clever math and physics to be able to find them. You have to build really impressive detectors to be able to search the sky for long enough and deep enough to be able to find, a needle in a haystack.
Well, Serafina, the end of your book has a list of your favorite astronomers. Who's
Yeah.
your all-time favorite astronomer? Who do you love the most?
Yeah, I think my favorite astronomer is actually not listed, and it's Carl Sagan. I love Carl Sagan for a lot of reasons, but most of all because he really is able to communicate, the magic of our universe with people and make it, seem so accessible and really so beautiful. And so I take a lot of inspiration from him as a person and also just as a communicator.
I agree. I love him too.
Yeah.
Well, what can our friends watching today do to discover more about the universe, more about the night sky, more about what's out there that we don't even know?
I think the first step is literally walking outside at night, obviously with your parent, and looking up at the night sky and being able to, just look up at the stars and start asking questions. There are lots of, these didn't exist when I was a kid, but there are lots of apps that you can download that will tell you what you're looking at.
Mhm.
That's really neat. You can look at planets, you can look at constellations, you can look at all sorts of things. And the wonderful thing about astronomy is that the night sky is really accessible. You don't need a telescope necessarily to see cool things. You can just walk outside and look up. Um, so that would be where I would start.
Serafina, I do that as well. So I have my phone. I point at the night sky, I push one button, it
Yes.
tells me that's Sirius or that's a planet.
Yeah.
And I'm always
Yeah.
wrong. Like I think it's
I
something
know.
else. And it's oh gosh, that's just a plane. So
Yes, yes, totally. Yeah, it's a good learning experience, right? You train yourself the more you use it, and then one day you'll know it's serious just by looking up.
oh, that's wonderful. Serafina, thank you so very, very much. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll see you at the end. Hang on one sec,
Sounds
okay?
great.
So we are now welcomed by Don Tate. And Don is the author and illustrator of so many wonderful books. Strong as Sandow, how Eugene Sandow became the strongest man on earth. I love the art in Whoosh, Lonnie Johnson's Super Soaking Stream of Inventions. That was one of my favorites. You can see all of his books back there, and I think he has more than that too. And he is also the founding host of the blog, The Brown Bookshelf. So, Don, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, it's an honor to have you here. So thank you so very much. You are here to talk about your book, Pigskins to Paintbrushes. But before we get to that, I want to ask you one question. You know, STEAM is science, technology, engineering, mathematics, but it's also the arts. And you were such an amazing artist. Have you always loved art? Why is it important to you? Why did you become an artist?
I can't think of a time when I wasn't an artist. When I visit elementary schools, I tell kids that, I think I must have been born with a pencil in my hand. And my mom actually sent a picture to me. It's a picture that I drew of her and my little brother, and I was 3 years old when I drew it. But I'm not only an artist, I was just keeping my hands busy. So I was the type of kid who just liked to make toys from things that I could find around the house. An empty toilet paper tube would end up being a choo-choo train. I spent a lot of time macrame and braiding, and building, just keeping my hands busy. And so there was never a time when I didn't think that I would grow up to be some kind of an artist. When I was little, I didn't really think about becoming a children's book artist. And actually, when I was a kid, I thought that I would grow up to become a puppet maker like Jim Henson, because I loved making puppets like out of socks. So yes, art has always been a part of who I am.
Well, I can see why you were drawn to the story of Ernie Barnes, without a doubt. So in Pigskins and Paintbrushes, you tell the inspiring story of Ernie Barnes, um, football player, artist, amazing. Why were you drawn to him? Why were you drawn to his story?
I think that with every character that I write about, I try to find some truth about that character that I can relate to. And when I was a kid, I was an artist. I wanted to be an artist, and I was not good at sports, just like Ernie Barnes. And Ernie Barnes was bullied for not being good at sports. And they called him names, and they said bad things about him, because the idea of an African American male, great big African American male who wanted to become an artist, they had names for guys like us. But he refused to be defined. While he did go out for football and he became a really good football player, art remained in his heart throughout, his entire football career. At the age of 27, he quit playing football and he started a very successful art career. And I also related to that because while I never considered myself to be a sports person, later in life, I became an athlete. Okay, I'm not out there on the basketball court or on the football court, but I love to go swimming. When I get done with this interview, I'm heading over to the YMCA and doing 60 laps. I like to walk and run and practice yoga. And I spend a lot of time working out in the gym. So eventually I defined myself as an athlete.
Mhm. Well, maybe I'll pass you in swimming there. You never know, right? Well, Don, you talk about the struggles that Ernie faced, and you mentioned them earlier. I mean, you talk about him not even being able to go into some art museums when he was young, right? And being restricted from that. And I'm curious, can you talk about those struggles he went through, being bullied, being bullied, being treated differently because of the color of his skin?
Yeah, so during the Jim Crow days, African Americans weren't allowed to go into hotels or museums or in certain places, and I thought that that was important to include in the story. Oftentimes, people will ask me if certain things that I talk about in my stories are appropriate for young children. And I don't believe in sugarcoating history, so I included that in all of the story. I
Mhm.
think that stories like mine um, offer kids like a blueprint for navigating some of the struggles that they may already be facing. Issues with civil rights and voting and the mistreatment of people of color, those aren't new things. They've been happening for 400, for 200, the last 50 years. And so stories like this can show kids how other people have overcome great obstacles to make great contributions to the world.
100%. Don, you talk about how Ernie made it to the National Football League, but his real success came after football with art. Can you tell us a little about how art became what we know him from?
Well, he went to college on a football scholarship, and and he wasn't a great football player, but he was a good football player. But art always remained in his heart, so he stopped playing football and he stopped playing track for a while, and he just focused his time in the art studio and learning all of the techniques about art. Um, and actually, when he after he left college, he planned on starting an art career. But the American League the American League was knocking at the door. He got a chance to play for the Baltimore Colts. He thought that playing football would make him a rich man. And so he played 5 seasons in the football leagues. But again, art was never in his heart. And so he quit playing football and he painted what he loved, which was the images of the African American people in his community. And he called those paintings the beauty of the ghetto.
Mhm.
And one of those paintings went on to be shown during my favorite television show, Good Times.
Mhm.
In the 1970s, there weren't a lot of television shows that featured people who looked like me, so I loved watching Good Times.
Mhm.
No matter what was going on in this family, JJ was always in the background painting pictures.
Mm.
And at the time, I thought that JJ was actually painting those pictures of beautiful, elongated, graceful African-American people. And it wasn't until many years later that I learned that Ernie Barnes was the artist who painted those pictures. And Ernie Barnes inspired so many other illustrators like me to go into the arts. And so I thought he is someone who young people need to know about and familiarize themselves with his artwork.
You know, it's interesting, Don, because I knew Ernie's name. I sort of had this vague conception of who he was. And in reading your book on on one of the last pages, you have one of his artworks there. And I was like, I've seen that. I've seen that in the museum. And I was so excited because I recognized that I had, also been touched by his presence there as well, too. So Don, what advice do you have for our friends watching today if they want to be an artist, if they want to be an athlete, if they want to be anything they can imagine in this world? What advice do you have for them?
Just stick, be true to yourself. Okay, there are going to be people who try to define who you should be. I remember when right out of college, I said I wanted to go into the arts, and my dad was like, "You're not going to be able to make an income as an artist." And my grandfather was like, "No, I think maybe you should go into business." And then one of my very first jobs, I had an employer tell me, "Well, you're lucky that I hired you because folks don't hire Black people in the arts." But I refused to be defined by others. Art was in my heart, and I've never done anything different. And I remember my grandpa, he lived to be in his 90s. And he'd call me up here in Austin and he would say, "Don, you're still working in the arts?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Grandpa, I'm still an artist. And I have not gone one day as an unemployed artist." So always be true to who you are and don't let anyone define who you should be.
Well, Don, you do it beautifully. So thank you so very, very
So much.
much. Thank you. I am excited to talk to our last guest, Adam Rex. Adam is the author and illustrator of more than 40 books for kids, including the New York Times bestseller, Frankenstein Makes a Sandwich, Choose First Day of School, which, by the way, you wrote with Neil Gaiman. I was so excited about that.
Neil Gaiman wrote it. I illustrated it.
It is it is brilliant. I was so excited by that.
Thank you.
And let's not forget my all-time favorite here. Are you scared, Darth Vader? Right? So wonderful. Adam, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us. Adam's here to talk about his book, Pluto Gets the Call. So I must admit, Adam, I am shocked. What do you mean Pluto is not a planet? I remember learning this many years ago. Pluto is the 9th planet. It's way out there. Can you read the pages of your book where Pluto is informed of this shocking news?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's see. When you and I were kids, everybody told us there were 9 planets, and every list of the planets ended with Pluto. It was Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And so here's the part of the book where Pluto gets a phone call, and it says, "Hold on a second, that's my phone." "You got Pluto." "Oh, what a coincidence. I was just talking to someone from Earth." And he's like, "I'm sorry, I should take this." Uh-huh. I'm what? What do you mean I'm not a planet anymore? Why am I not a planet anymore? Oh, okay. Thank you for calling. And then you may know that Pluto has a shape on it that looks kind of like a heart. So Laurie Keller illustrated Pluto's heart breaking as he learns that news. And I imagine a lot of people probably take from this that I am really outraged and up in arms about Pluto's demotion. But to be honest, I get it. We were approaching a time where we had to kind of make a decision, or at least the astronomers did. I didn't have anything to do with it. But we were going to have to either decide a new definition for the word planet that would give us fewer planets and kick Pluto out of the club, or we were going to have to start accepting that actually there's other planets out there. There's a lot of other planets that we now call dwarf planets like Pluto, but there's a chance that we're just going to discover more and more of them. And astronomers were starting to look toward a future where we might have 20, 50, 100 planets. So they decided to change that word because it's just a word and it only means what we all decide that it means.
That would make it incredibly hard to make those models that we always made in school if you had 20 or 30 behind it as opposed to just those 9.
Right, and they're getting smaller and smaller if you try to do it to scale because they get really small. Pluto is not even as big as Earth's moon.
Right. Well, Pluto is still incredibly cool. And Adam, you spend a lot of time not only describing Pluto, but also all the other things that he discovers. When he finds out he isn't a planet, he decides to visit some of his cosmic friends and sort of let them know. What does he find out about all these other features within our universe?
Oh, there's so many kind of just interesting, really so many great little facts about the planets that there was, I really had to make a lot of choices about what am I going to say. I only have a little bit that I can say about this planet or that planet. And then every now and then an interesting fact would stick out to me. Like, for example, I have to admit, I'm not an expert. My wife's the expert. Like Sarafina earlier, my wife is actually an astrophysicist as well. Planets aren't her specialty, but still she helped me find the resources that I needed to write a book, because I really did want to write a book about the solar system. And, before I started this, I thought Mercury must be the hottest planet. It is the closest to the sun, but it's not. It's Venus. And Mercury is so interesting in that it's hot and cold. If you were standing on Mercury in the sun, you would burn up. And if you were standing on Mercury in the shade, you'd freeze. And that blows my mind, that there could be such amazing extremes on one tiny little planet that close to the sun. So I learned a lot in the course of making this book. I'm not too proud to admit that a lot of the stuff that I put into this book is stuff that I didn't know before I started. But I just, I took my wife's advice and I found the right resources online that she told me that I could trust, and I got out and learned, and the kids who are watching could do the same thing.
I think my favorite part is when you talk about all the different planets that have rings. And I didn't know they all were very, very different. Can you talk about that briefly?
Yeah, there's, I think we think about Saturn having rings, but the truth is that Uranus has rings too, and I didn't know that when I was a real little kid. I don't know when they discovered it. I don't expect that when I was real young, I was, like constantly on the cutting edge of learning every little thing that the astronomers knew. But Uranus has rings too, and there's an amazing ring of stuff that exists between Mars and Jupiter called the asteroid belt. And there's another ring that Pluto is in called the Kuiper belt, that is this giant ring of rock and ice that exists way, way far out away from the sun. And there's probably more beyond that, because the funny thing is we can learn a lot about the universe looking very, very far away. When my wife was getting her PhD in astrophysics, she was part of a group that was building a telescope that flew up to the edge of space and was looking way, way out into the beginnings of the universe, really, because the farther you look, the farther back in time you're looking. And she was looking for some of the stuff that Sarafina was talking about earlier too, the birth of stars. And it's amazing that we can do that, and we can look, 10 billion light years away at stars being born, but we're not really sure what's in our own backyard just out beyond Pluto, because it's a lot harder to see something that isn't making its own light. So it's very possible that we're going to learn that there are more planets out there beyond Pluto, maybe really big planets out there beyond Pluto that we just don't know about yet.
Well, I can't wait to find out. Adam, at the end of your book, it's my favorite part of your book. You say that Pluto is a planet for everyone. Can you explain that?
My idea with this book was to end with consoling Pluto that Pluto is actually even more special now, really, than maybe Pluto was when I was a kid, because now Pluto is the planet that doesn't get to be a planet anymore. So I say that Pluto is still a planet to everyone who was too short to ride the Ferris wheel, to everyone who ever put $7 in a claw machine and still didn't get the hippopotamus they wanted, to all the people who picked last for kickball. Pluto can still be a planet for them. Because honestly, you know, the astronomers can have their word planet, and you know, we can all have our word too. It's up to everyone to decide what that word means to you.
Adam, I think you've convinced me. Pluto is now my favorite, and I'm going to say it, planet. I'm convinced.
I can't stop you.
Thank you. I want to bring back Don and Sarafina. Welcome back, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
As you know, I am an English teacher, and my favorite time of the year is when the Children's Book Festival rolls around. I love children's books. I think books are just pure magic. How did you become readers? How did you develop this love of reading? Sarafina, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I used to carry around a book with me anywhere I went when I was a little kid, and I don't think I ever outgrew that. I typically have 2 to 3 books in my backpack at all times. I was an only child, and books were my friends. They were, you know, they offered an escape from, you know, whatever was going on in my life. And I think I really fell in love with reading probably around the same time that I fell in love with the night sky. You know, I was really, really young, and it has continued to grow and grow and grow.
Sarafina, I think they're still my friends. That hasn't changed.
Yeah, I totally agree. It'll be with me forever.
Don, how about you?
So I was not a reader when I was younger. I just couldn't remember as I read. Sometimes I had issues with comprehension, so I just stayed far away from books. When I did read, I loved our family illustrated medical encyclopedia that was filled with like bloody stomach ulcers and pussy toe sores and stuff like that. I think it's because I've just always liked nonfiction, you know, because I also loved the Funk and Wagnall student encyclopedias when I was a kid. But it really wasn't until after college, when I was working at an educational publishing company, when I discovered the book Black Boy by Richard Wright. And that was the first time that I saw a character that looked like me, that shared my history, that shared my culture, that I realized, okay, so there's Black people in books. Black books are for Black folks too. And then that is when I finally started reading. So then I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and that led me to Claude Brown and Gordon Parks and so many other African-American authors. And so it wasn't until that point that I became a voracious reader.
That sounds wonderful. Adam, how about you?
I think I kind of slot right in between Sarafina and Don in a way, in that I don't think you could have called me a voracious reader, but I was a reader. And I think what kept me a reader is that, honestly, when I was a kid, the stuff I chose for myself was garbage. It was just like the worst pulpy fiction that kept me engaged. And I think I'm just really lucky that I know that my big time reader mom did not appreciate the stuff that I was choosing for myself at all. And, you know, maybe Don would agree that it's a good thing that somebody didn't come along and tell him that, you know, you should stop reading the pussy filled medical encyclopedias, and here, you know, here's some Little House on the Prairie for you, read this instead. And I appreciated that my parents they looked down their nose at the stuff I was reading probably, but they let me read it. They let me choose it. They let me read comic books, and they tried to talk me into other stuff, but they let me have what I wanted, and then that carried me through. So that later, it was honestly like the day I graduated college, and I no longer had to read anything because I was being told to. That suddenly I wanted to read everything because I could. And I grabbed nonfiction and fiction and voices that of people I kind of never read before, and books from walks of life that I hadn't considered. And I don't think I would have done that if I hadn't had the garbage to kind of see me through.
Mm-hmm. Wow. The garbage is just as amazing to read as well, too. It's just as important.
There's a place for
100%.
garbage.
we found out that I think you mentioned, Adam, right? Doesn't Pluto call that ring of asteroids sort of garbage as well, too? That exact line.
Pluto doesn't choose the best word for the asteroid belt, and he has to apologize to all of the bodies and dwarf planets that exist in that belt. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today, guys. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
This was great.
Well, that concludes our session, and I hope you have had as much fun as I did listening to these amazing writers and artists. Make sure you sign up for the STEAM Race to Space Reading Challenge today, and there you can actually hear all of our authors read their books in full. So visit the website, sign up immediately, and start your reading adventure today. Thank you.